Today is September 11th, 2021, and it is the 20-year anniversary of the terrorist attacks that took place on 9/11. It's also the 9-year anniversary of the attack that happened in Benghazi, Libya, that took the lives of, I believe, 4 Americans. So in honor of the terrorist attack that happened 20 years ago on 9/11, we are going to be climbing the equivalent of 110 floors in honor of all the people that lost their lives that day. On the anniversary of events like this that happened in our nation's history, we like doing challenges like that, like we've done the Murph and other challenges, as a way of remembering the people that gave their lives. So that's what we're going to be doing today. There are 2 sides of a coin when you're remembering a tragic event like 9/11. And on one side, that is, we are extremely sad for everybody that did lose their life in the terrorist attack, all the people that lost their life, with the exclusion of the terrorist. And we're also deeply saddened over all the U.S. service members that died as a result of the war on terror, including the 13 lives most recently lost in Afghanistan. That's the sad part. You know, there are people that woke up that day that never got to go to bed. There are people that had their very last sunrise, their very last time they hugged a loved one, the very last time that they did a lot of things and they had no idea it was going to be the last. And on the other side, we get to be grateful that we have another sunrise and sunset to enjoy. We have another day of life that the Lord's given us. And we need to live our lives with purpose. And realizing the sacrifice of other people, we can live with even more purpose, knowing what they've given and knowing what they miss out on, but what we can still experience. And living our lives in the way that if it is the last time, if this is our last day, last time we get to talk to a loved one, that we know we have lived a life of purpose and a life that will glorify and honor the Lord. Also, today is the Air Force Navy football game. Yeah, hopefully it goes well. Last year did not go well, and we were doing burpees for every point the other team scored. So Air Force, like if they got a touchdown, we do 7 burpees, and if they got another one, we do 14 burpees, and then just kept going. We did so many burpees. It was pretty miserable, and hardly any push-ups. We do push-ups when the team we're rooting for scores. So hopefully we'll be doing a lot of push-ups. We won't have a problem with that. These vests are each 20 pounds, so I'm gonna see how long I can last with 40 pounds. All right, I just finished about a minute ago, and it was pretty challenging. It's amazing that they had to sprint 110 stories up, and it was probably so hot in the building, and they had a lot of equipment on too.
You ain't be steering the horse!
Years ago today, I was in my last year at the Naval Academy. There they call it a first C, other places call it a senior. And it was September, school had just started, and I had the first period off, and so when I was walking to my first class of the day, I saw one of my friends on Stripling Walk, and he said, "Did you hear what happened?" I said, "No." And he said that a airplane crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers. And I thought that it must have been a small airplane and that it was a mistake. A lot of people thought that. Well, when I got to my classroom, it was actually my favorite class that I was taking that semester with Mr. Bergman, I think it was his name. And the TV was on and the news was on. And the cameras were on the World Trade Center tower that was smoking. It was on fire. And we were all watching, and as we watched, we saw the second airplane hit the second tower. I think that was United 175. And when we saw that it was not a small airplane, there was a big airplane, when you saw the fire from the crash, we realized that it wasn't a mistake, that two airplanes crashing into the World Trade Centers cannot be a mistake. And then only minutes later we heard that that something hit the Pentagon. And at first people thought it was a missile, but that was another airplane that hit the Pentagon. And as we watched the television, we saw the Twin Towers burning, and as we were watching, we saw one of the World Trade Center towers. They were called the Twin Towers. One of the Twin Towers kind of disappear in a cloud of smoke, and nobody really knew what happened until the smoke started to clear, and it was evident that the tower had collapsed. And as we stayed in that class for longer than normal, the classes were kind of canceled for the rest of the day. We stayed in that class until lunchtime. So we saw the first tower fall, and then as we watched, we saw the second tower fall. And each time when we saw the airplane hit the second airplane hit the second tower, and we saw the first tower collapse, and we saw the second tower collapse, each time that happened, people were very quiet. And you could only hear people's gasps and what was happening. They could not believe what they were seeing on the TV. And normally, after the morning classes, we would form up, we'd have an afternoon formation and then go into King Hall and sit together with our platoons and our companies in King Hall. But that day, we just went into King Hall and sat down as we went in, and everybody was much more quiet than normal. Normally King Hall is pretty loud because everybody's talking and they're excited, but everybody was very somber. And our afternoon classes were canceled, and I was sitting in my room. When I was finally able to go back to my room, I tried to call your Jamie and Papa to let them know I was okay, but the phone lines weren't working. When I would pick up the phone and I would get the dial tone, but when I called, it said that all lines were busy and that we couldn't go through. And I didn't think that your mommy, who is in Saipan, was awake yet, so I hadn't tried to call her yet. But later on, as I had sent an email to your Jamie and Papa to let them know I was okay, and I think I sent an email to your mommy in Saipan, and as I was at the computer, I saw your mommy come up on a thing called AOL Instant Messenger, and that was kind of like text messaging back then, but you did on a computer. And me and your mommy were writing back and forth, and everybody was very concerned. We later found out that those two aircraft crashed into the World Trade Centers, and then an airplane crashed into the Pentagon, and then United Flight 93 crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. And nobody's sure what United Flight 93 was headed for, but it was also hijacked. And both your mommy and I and everybody was concerned about what was going on. We were obviously under attack, but nobody knew who caused the attack until until terrorists took responsibility, and they took responsibility for the attack. And we realized that our country was going to change. Before that time, our country had not been at war for a while, and shortly after that, President Bush declared war on terrorism. And since that time, we've been at war. It's been called the Global War on Terrorism, GWAT. And we didn't have classes for several days, and the Marines on the yard were standing more duty to try to keep the yard safe against terrorists. And they, instead of doing regular shifts like 8 hours, they were doing 12 hours on and then 12 hours off, and then having to go right back onto duty. And then my class, the class of 2002, graduated in May, and we were one of the first classes in a long time to graduate in a time of war. And we all knew that we were going to be fighting the global war on terror as new second lieutenants and ensigns. And then that was my first experience with my first brush with terrorism. And then I had you remember that second brush with terrorism on July 16th, 2015? It's about 14 years later when terrorists attacked my workplace. Do you remember that? Yeah. Terrorists try to use fear to control people. And what a lot of times they don't realize is that when that happens, people actually unite. And we saw that in our country in 2001 and 9/11. We saw our country unite against the common goal of protecting our freedoms as a nation. And then in July 16th, 2015 in Chattanooga, we saw the community of Chattanooga unite against to protect our freedoms also, and not to be controlled by fear. And that's one thing that was in my dream, is that I was very troubled that we as a nation were kind of fighting each other. Instead of working together to make things better, we were fighting each other, and things were getting worse. And it's important that we remember to love our fellow man. Whether our fellow man is an American or from another nation. And it's very important that we especially love the people that are in our community, and we work together to make our nation better, not allow it to get worse, right? We need to pray for our nation. Remembering the victims and heroes of 9/11 helps us to enjoy, or helps us to remember to make the most of every moment that we have and enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy every day. They don't get to enjoy those freedoms anymore, but we can honor them in the way that we live our life. And I hope that we do that well.